The Battle of Mount Tumbledown was an engagement in the Falklands War, one of a series of battles that took place during the British advance towards Stanley. Overview. On the night of 13–14 June 1982, the British launched an assault on Mount Tumbledown, one of the highest points near the town of Port Stanley, the capital, and succeeded in driving Argentinian forces from the mountain. This close-quarters night battle was later dramatized in the BBC film Tumbledown. The attacking British forces consisted of the 2nd Battalion, Scots Guards, mortar detachments from 42 Commando, Royal Marines and the 1st Battalion, 7th Duke of Edinburgh's own Gurkha Rifles, as well as support from a troop of the Blues and Royals equipped with 2 Scorpion and 2 Scimitar armoured vehicles. The Argentinian forces defending the mountains were Commander Carlos Robacio's 5th Marine Infantry Battalion. The defending Argentines were already proving costly in lives in the shelling that was directed by Sub-Lieutenant Marcelo de Marco of the 5th Marines from his observation post on Tumbledown Mountain. 4 paras and 1 Ream craftsman were killed on Mount Longdon, and another 7 paratroopers were wounded, and a Welsh guardsman was killed while riding a motorbike in the Fitzroy Stanley track. Prior to the British landings, the Argentinian Marine Battalion had been brought up to brigade strength by a company of the Amphibious Engineers Company, a heavy machine gun company of the Headquarters Battalion, a battery of the 1st Marine Field Artillery Battalion, and 3 Tiger Katsam batteries of the 1st Marine Anti-Aircraft Regiment, as well as a 2nd Marine Infantry Battalion platoon and a 3rd Marine Infantry Battalion platoon. As part of the British plan, 1/7th GR was given the task of capturing the sub-hill of Mount William held by O Company, the 5th Marine Battalion's reserve, and then allowing the Welsh Guards through to seize Sapper Hill, the final obstacle before Stanley. The attack was supported by naval gunfire from HMS Active's 4.5-inch gun. At the time of the battle, ship-of-the-line Lieutenant Eduardo Villarraz's N Company held Mount Tumbledown. Mount William was just south of Tumbledown, and the Marine Battalion's O Company under ship-of-the-line Lieutenant Ricardo Quiroga was on its lower slopes. Major Oscar Ramon J. Apcbg Company, 6th Regiment was in reserve behind N Company. Ship-of-the-line Lieutenant Rodolfo Oscar Cionchi's M Company occupied Sapper Hill. The Argentinian defenders held firm under the British softening-up bombardment, which began at 7:30 local time. Major Jamie later recalled, "I heard the cries of the wounded calling for their comrades, 12 men wounded before nightfall. We thought we had suffered before, but what luxury and comfort compared to this." During the battle, the 5th Marines command post took 5 direct hits, but Commander Robacio emerged unscathed. Nakar Company deployment. The Nakar Company from the 5th Marine Battalion was commanded by Captain Villarraza, was highlighted to defend a sector comprising an area between Moody Brook Valley and existing coast south of Mount William. The 1st Platoon, led by Midshipman Beanchy, was located 500 meters southwest of Mount William. The 2nd Platoon, led by Midshipman Oru Isabala, was located a little more to the northwest of the 1st section. The 3rd Platoon, led by Chief Petty Officer Lucero, was located north of Mount Tumbledown, on its east end. The left flank of this section was very close to the company HQ. The 4th section, led by Lieutenant Vasquez, was located at the west end of Tumbledown, with their area of responsibility pointing west and south. The 5th section, led by Lieutenant Mino, was at the west end of Tumbledown, behind the 4th section, facing west and north. While the traditional organization of the companies in the infantry battalions is with 3 platoons, during the war were added 2 platoons. The 4th section, whose leader was added to the 5th Marine Battalion during the war, because he was studying at the Navy Officers' School, and 5th Platoon leader from the Amphibious Engineers Unit. The 12.7 machine guns was located behind the first section. -105 mm cannons without recoil divided. A group was at the left end of the first section and one on the right end of the third section. -60 mm mortar were between the fourth section and the company command post. 4th Platoon Deployment. The 5th Marine Battalion, Nakar Company, 4th Platoon was located on the western edge of Mount Tumbledown. His forehead pointed south. The purpose of that location was to beat with guns the flank of the valley that was left to his forehead, approximately 1,000 to 1,500 meters to front of the 1st and 2nd Platoon were located. Section had a front line of about 150 to 200 meters. Its right veered westward, covering that sector at the end of the high. It had a depth of about 50 meters, including a secondary position located just to the rear in the topographic crest Tumbledown, about 30 to 50 meters beyond the main position. Initially, the platoon had two groups of shooters and firing command. The platoon leader was the Lieutenant Vasquez. Each group consisted of 10 soldiers. The left group was directly under Lieutenant Vasquez's command and Petty Officer Foche Zato was his radio operator. The other group was led Petty Officer Castillo. The left group had left a 60 mm mortar and a machine gun mag. The group on the right had a FAB rifle and a machine gun mag. The rest of the staff had FAL rifles. The defensive position consisted of a main position and the secondary position indicated, besides considerable amount of foxholes, which became change positions, additional or simulated. These were the result of natural works, artillery impacts, etc. About 5 days before the 14th of June 1982, the 5th Platoon of the Nakar Company was created under Lieutenant Mino command. This section took a defensive position in the topographical ridge west end of Tumbledown, pointing in and almost closing with its left end the land that separated the far right. The distance separating this platoons varied between 20 meters and 50 meters, while both sections were back-to-back. On the 12th of June, the 4th section received reinforcement by the addition of approximately 20 soldiers from the Argentine Army, a corporal and the sub-lieutenant Oscar Augusto Silva. All these staff came from the RE-12 and RE-4. Lieutenant Vasquez ordered Sub-Lieutenant Silva Vasquez to go with a squad of 5 men to occupy the central position of the shift position in the rear, and its mission was to cover by fire the retreat of the 4th in case they could not hold the leading position. In the last days before the fight, the 4th and 5th section coordinated the following action. When they fight start, they will resist in their main positions. If the platoons could not stay in the main position, both sections retreat to the alternative position in the topographical ridge of Mount Tumbledown covered by guns from Lieutenant Silva's squad. In the topographical ridge, both sections, almost back-to-back, will try to maintain the west end of Tumbledown. If unsuccessful, both they redeploy to the Nakar Company HQ located in the east end of Tumbledown, approximately 1,800 meters behind them. It was explicitly coordinated that none of the two platoons will retreat without the other. The day before the battle, some modifications were made. Corporal Tejada came to occupy a position in the machine gun on the right, his head of it. The soldiers from the Argentine Army were distributed along the main defensive position. Section was composed of 30 Marines, but where the fighting started there were only 27, because some had been evacuated 3 days earlier by injuries suffered during the British bombardment. And also, the previous days were added the Lieutenant Silva with 15 Army conscripts. In total, there were 44 men in the Vasquez's position. Early moves. On the morning of the 13th of June, the Scots Guards were moved by helicopter from their position at Bluff Cove to an assembly area near Goat Ridge, west of Mount Tumbledown. During this day, a dispatch rider from the 1st Welsh Guards Battalion was mortally wounded by Argentine shellfire directed from Tumbledown. The British plan called for a diversionary attack south of Mount Tumbledown by a small number of the Scots Guards, assisted by the 4 light tanks of the Blues and Royals, whilst the main attack came as a 3-phase silent advance from the west of Mount Tumbledown. In the first phase, G Company would take the western end of the mountain. In the second phase, left flank would pass through the area taken by G Company to capture the center of the summit. In the third phase, right flank would pass through left flank to secure the eastern end of Tumbledown. A daytime assault was initially planned, but was postponed at the British battalion commander's request. In a meeting with his company commanders, the consensus was that the long uphill assault across the harsh ground of Tumbledown would be suicidal in daylight. Diversion. At 8:30 p.m. on the 13th of June, the diversionary attack began. The 2nd BN Scots Guards Reconnaissance Platoon, commanded by Major Richard Bethell, and supported by 4 light tanks of the Blues and Royals, clashed with an Argentinian Marine Company in a delayed position on the lower slopes of Mount William. On Mount William's southern slopes, one of the tanks was taken out of action by a booby trap. The initial advance was unopposed, but a heavy firefight broke out when British troops made contact with Argentinian defences. The Argentinians opened fire, killing 2 British soldiers and wounding 4 others. After 2 hours of hard fighting, the company withdrew to its main defences and the British secured the position. Marine First Class Private José Luis Fazio fought against Bethell's force. At about 2,230 hours, our battalion had its first intensive gun battle with British companies which appeared out of nowhere. I heard Private Roberto Barbosa yell, "The English are here." I remember our operations officer requested the artillery to assist at 23.00 with star shells. The close-quarter battle was such that the Argentine artillery was unable to drop shells onto the British attackers. I was shooting, doing my work. I don't know if I killed anyone. We just fired our rifles, that's all. Contact was maintained for over an hour before battalion headquarters ordered Opera Company to fall back. What we did not realize at the time was that at least a wounded Marine made his way to the amphibious engineer platoon position and hurled a grenade, wounding a major. Simultaneously the major opened fire, killing him. Fearing a counter-attack, the British platoon withdrew into an undetected minefield, and were forced to abandon their dead. 2 men were wounded covering the withdrawal and 4 more were wounded by mines. The explosions prompted the Argentine Marine Major Antonio Pernius to order the 81 mm mortar platoon on Mount William and the longer-range 120 mm mortars attached to C Company. 3rd Infantry Regiment on Sapper Hill to open fire on the minefield and the likely withdrawal route of anyone attacking Mount William. The barrage lasted for about 40 minutes and more British casualties would have been inflicted if the mortar bombs had not landed on soft peat, which absorbed most of the power of the explosions. Night attack. At 9 p.m., half an hour after the start of the diversionary attack, Major Ian Dalzajob's G Company started its advance of nearly 2 miles. Reaching its objective undetected, the company found the western end of the mountain undefended and occupied it easily, but later came under heavy shell fire that wounded Major Dalzajob in the head. Major John Keishley's left flank passed through them and reached the central region of the peak unopposed, but then came under heavy fire. The Argentinians, later learned to be of company strength, directed mortar, grenade, machine gun and small arms fire from very close range at the British company, killing 3 British soldiers. Marine Sub-Lieutenant Hector Minot's 5th Platoon, Amphibious Engineer Company, held the rocks to the right of Marine Sub-Lieutenant Carlos Vasquez's 4th Platoon, 5th Marines. In the center and to the left of the 4th Platoon were 2nd Lieutenant Oscar Silva's RE 4 Platoon and 2nd Lieutenant Celestino Mosteran's RE 12 Platoon, which had recently fought on Goat Ridge and Mount Harriet. For 4 or 5 hours, 3 platoons of Argentinian riflemen, machine gunners, and mortarmen pinned the British down. To help identify the bunkers, the Guardsmen fired flares at the summit. The Guardsmen traded 66mm rockets and 84mm anti-tank rounds with the Argentinians, who were protected in their rock bunkers. The Argentinians refused to budge. The Guardsmen could hear some of them shouting obscene phrases in English and even singing as they fought. Meanwhile, 2 Royal Navy frigates, HMS Yarmouth and Active, were pounding Tumbledown with their 4.5-inch guns. At one stage, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Scott thought the battalion might have to withdraw and attack again the next night. The old nails were being bitten a bit. If we had been held on Tumbledown, it might have encouraged them to keep on fighting. Left flank. The fighting was hard going for left flank. The Argentinians had well dug-in machine guns and snipers. At 2:30 a.m., however, a second British assault overwhelmed the men of Mino, Silva and Mosterin, but the bulk of Vasquez's platoon would continue fighting till about 7 a.m. The British troops swarmed over the mountaintop and killed or wounded Silva's men, at times fighting with fixed bayonets. Marine Private George Sanchez recalled, "The fighting was sporadic, but at times fierce, as we tried to maintain our position. By this time we had 10 or 12 dead, including 1 officer, 2nd Lieutenant Oscar Silva, Argentine Army. I hadn't fired directly at a British soldier, as they had been too hard to get a clear shot at. I can remember lying there with all this firing going over my head. They were everywhere." The platoon commander, Marine Sub-Lieutenant Carlos Daniel Vasquez, then called Private Ramon Rotella manning the 60mm mortar, and Rotella fired it straight up into the air so that the bombs landed on ourselves. At this point I had been up and in actual combat for over 6 hours. It was snowing and we were tired. Some of the guys had surrendered, but I didn't want to do this. I had only 20 rounds left and I decided to continue the fight from Mount William. I popped up, fired a rifle grenade in the direction of 8 to 10 British soldiers to keep their heads down, and then ran for the 2nd platoon. I can remember saying some type of prayer hoping the British wouldn't shoot me in the back. Major Keishley, who was to become a senior general after the war, was the first man into the Argentine position, personally shooting 2 Argentinian conscripts and bayoneting a third, his bayonet breaking in 2. Seeing the company commander among the Argentinians inspired 14 and 15 platoons to make the final dash across open ground to get within bayoneting distance of the remaining Marines. Keishley and 6 other guardsmen suddenly found themselves standing on top of the mountain, looking down on Stanley, which was under street lighting, and vehicles could be seen moving along the roads. The Argentinians, in the form of 2nd Lieutenant Augusto La Madrid platoon from Major J. Mitz B Company and Marine Sub-Lieutenant Hector Munoz Amphibious Engineer platoon, now counter-attacked, and a burst of machine gun fire from either the Army or Marine platoon injured 3 British men, including Lieutenant Alastair Mitchell, commander of 15 platoon. A bullet passed through the compass secured on Keishley's belt. For his bayonet charge, Major Keishley was awarded the Military Cross.